And it's very innovative. At one place there is an account where he auctions his shaving stick which he shaved that morning and gets 60 rupees for it. Right now, so of course it shows what a smart political operator he was. I also have a long account of a fundraiser in Bombay in 1920 during the during the non-cooperation movement, where he raises money from the merchants of Bombay. But the point I wanted to make was that I deal with all Gandhi's political campaigns in rich detail, while recognizing that his social campaigns for Hindu-Muslim harmony and for the abolition of untouchability were for him as important as the campaigns to get the British to quit India. So I deal with Gandhi's campaigns. Then there is a great deal on Gandhi's critics. That is, his two great critics, Ambedkar and Jinnah, who were his two most considerable Indian critics, both people of colossal intellect, phenomenal intellect, really powerful thinkers, successful lawyers, which Gandhi had never been himself. Jinnah, who argued that the Congress was a Hindu party, and Ambedkar, who argued that the Congress represented not Hindus but only upper caste Hindus. And they were his two great antagonists, and Jinnah was arguing with him from the 1920s, Ambedkar for almost as long. And I have represented their arguments as they evolved over a period of time. And I have done it without necessarily taking sides. Maybe with Jinnah versus Gandhi, I am more on the side of Gandhi. But Jinnah as Ambedkar, it is impossible to take sides. They were two great figures whom destiny placed as adversaries and had to place adversaries. Gandhi was an upper caste reformer, guilt-ridden upper caste reformer, who did more than any upper caste Hindu before him to challenge the practice of untouchability, whereas Ambedkar was a reformer from below, an emancipator of his own people, a person with great sense of self-respect and dignity. And history placed them as adversaries, and together they undermined the legitimacy, they undermined the social basis of the caste system and moved India towards a more egalitarian social order. But I deal not just with Ambedkar and Jinnah, but also with Gandhi's critics from the left. For example, Bhagat Singh, people like Bhagat Singh and Subhash Bose, who felt that armed struggle and not non-violence was the way to get the British out of India. I also have a lot on the different viceroys Gandhi dealt with. Gandhi dealt with 7 viceroys in all. And it's very interesting to see the kind of the perception that different viceroys had of him. If you just look at the epigraph to that book you opened. Epigraph. It was right at the beginning. Can someone just hand me a copy of the book? This is quite funny. Let me read it. I'll give it back to you. Don't worry. So I'll just read this out to you. So okay, yeah. So Gandhi dealt with 7 viceroys in all, starting with Harding, who was here when he comes in 1915, and ending with Mountbatten. And I've gone through the kind of private correspondence of each of these viceroys, because some were indifferent to him, some were exasperated by him, some were admiring of him, Mountbatten at the end, and also Irving to some extent. Now here is Lord Willingdon, who was the one who had the most venomous hatred for Gandhi. This is Lord Willingdon writing about Gandhi in 1933. I quote, "It's a beautiful world if it wasn't for Gandhi." He's writing to his sister. Willingdon is writing to his sister from Shimla, from the Viceroyal Lodge in Shimla. He's writing, "It's a beautiful world if it wasn't for Gandhi, who is really a perfect nuisance. At the bottom of every move he makes, which he always says is inspired by God, one discovers the political maneuver. I see the American press is saying what a wonderful man he is. I see the American press is saying what a wonderful man Gandhi is. But the fact is that we live in the midst of very unpractical, mystical and superstitious folk in India who look upon Gandhi as something holy, whereas I look upon him as the biggest humbug alive." Okay, so his relations with his viceroys are also very interesting. So I deal with Gandhi's campaigns, with Gandhi's critics. Then I also talk of the kind of photographers that just, this is rather puzzling why they didn't want to look for it. But the material you find in the Mumbai in the Mumbai archive is incredibly rich. I'll give you just one illustration. Gandhi's last jail term was so obviously, before I come to this, obviously this material in the Mumbai archives will carry a lot on the satyagrahas Gandhi led. The Rolat Satyagraha was centered in Mumbai. The Bardoli Satyagraha was in Gujarat, which was under the Bombay Presidency. The Salt March was again to the districts of the Bombay Presidency. So there's lots of new material, the intelligence reports on the satyagrahas. But there's also material in this provincial archive of an intimate personal nature you cannot find anywhere else. So Gandhi's last prison term was in the Aga Khan Palace. And I hope those of you who have been to Pune will go there. It's a very moving place because Gandhi's wife died there, Kasturba, and his secretary and his closest friend, Mahadev Desai, also died in that prison. And there is a memorial to both of them, very pretty, nice, understated memorial to both of them in the Aga Khan prison, which is now a national memorial. But in the Maharashtra State Archives in the Elphinstone College are the day-to-day reports of Kasturba's last illness. And what, Devdas Gandhi is coming, Rajaji is trying to get hold, the doctor is coming, the penicillin is sought for, doesn't come. In desperation, Gandhi looks for an Ayurvedic physician. Gandhi is distraught. All these personal emotions are captured in his intelligence reports. Then Gandhi himself goes on fast. Now again, something which will be of real interest to a civil service fraternity. In that Gandhi, while he is in the Aga Khan prison, the Quit India movement starts on the 8th of August 1942. Gandhi is immediately arrested. He announces it in the Govaliya Times Maidan in Mumbai. With his colleagues, he is taken straight to the Aga Khan Palace in Pune, which the British had prepared for him 3 years ago. They said, we're going to arrest him and let's prepare a place for him. So they prepare for him, and this is also something I'm sure some of you have to prepare in advance for the arrest of seditious people like me, but that's okay. we'll leave that be. There must be preparations going on somewhere. So he is taken to this palace, and 6 days after he reaches, his closest associate and right hand, left hand man, Mahadev Desai, dies. And Gandhi is distraught because Mahadev is everything to him. Mahadev is closer to him than Nehru and Patel. And meanwhile, the Quit India movement breaks out. Here and there it takes a violent form. And the British issue a fat document blaming Gandhi for the violence. And that document is called Congress Responsibility for Disturbances 1942-43. And as someone who has preached non-violence all his life, Gandhi is appalled and deeply disturbed by this calumny cast at his character. So he goes on a 3-week fast. He goes on a 3-week fast, and this fast is reported day to day in the intelligence reports in that archive, which I think I was the first Gandhi biographer to see. Now, this is where, as I said, would be interesting to civil service people. It's very interesting because there's this correspondence going on. Gandhi is about to fast, and Gandhi may die. I mean, he is in his early 70s. He is 74, and there's a distinct chance that he would die because he's emotionally distraught because of Mahadev's death, and he's going on this fast. And the reports where the doctors say he might die. Now, the correspondence in the archive shows the very responses of the British and the Indian ICS people. So the Home Secretary in Delhi is a man who hates Gandhi called R.A. Tottenham. And it's not a personal hatred. There's also a political edge to the hatred, because you must remember that at this stage, the Second World War was on, and the British were fighting with their backs to the wall against Hitler. And at this stage, Gandhi's Quit India movement, had disrupted all the defense of India. So Tottenham is consumed with hatred against Gandhi. And he says, if the fellow dies, let him die. The government will not issue a statement of condolence. And we will not fly any flags on half-mast. We will not allow a public cremation. Let the bloody bugger die. Right. And the Home Secretary in Bombay is an Indian ICS man called H.V.R. Iyengar, who later becomes a governor of the Reserve Bank. And he is an Indian. he has divided loyalties. He wants to serve the Raj, but he knows the greatness of Gandhiji. He knows Gandhiji is the greatest, modern Indian. So he writes to Tottenham saying, look, don't be so heartless. Let's prepare a draft. I hope Gandhi does not die, but if Gandhi dies, let's prepare a draft saying that the Viceroy and the government of India deeply mourn the death of Mahatma Gandhi, who was a leader to his people. So the archives give you all these personal, details which the collected works won't. So the reason this book took so long to write, and the reason that it's so fact, is because I have used a far greater range of sources than any previous biographer. And I could go on the sources, but I'll stop. But I'll tell you a little bit about the major themes of the book. So, what this book does is it gives you rich, detailed archival accounts of all Gandhi's political campaigns based on fresh and new material. The Salt March, for example, I've reconstructed through using daily newspaper reports. And newspaper reports are different kinds. So a newspaper like the Bombay Chronicle, which is sympathetic to Gandhi, a newspaper like the Times of India, which is hostile to Gandhi, a newspaper like Pratap in Uttar Pradesh, which is covering the Salt March in Hindi. So what the Hindi press is saying as distinct from the Indian press. So it gives you an account of all his major campaigns, including some campaigns that are really very important but have been forgotten. Gandhi organized 3 or possibly 4 All India campaigns, the Rural Satyagraha of 1919, the Non-Cooperation Movement of 1920-22, the Salt March of 1930, leading into the Civil Disobedience Movement, and finally the Quit India Movement of the 1940s. Now these were all political campaigns aimed at dismantling the edifice of the British Raj. However, in Gandhi's eyes, 2 other campaigns were as important as the political campaigns. And these were campaigns aimed at shaming Indians at what they did to fellow Indians. One is well known, his work for peace in Bengal and Bihar in 1946-47, where he went on a padayatra through Bihar and Bengal, promoting Hindu-Muslim harmony. The other is less well known, but actually in some ways as even more important, which is his Harijan tour of 1933-34. This is something which I'm sure young Indians don't know about. Very few historians have written about it in detail. But Gandhi, when he's in jail in Pune in 32-33, has this famous debate with Ambedkar about separate electorates. And through this debate, he realizes how much work has to be done to acquaint upper caste Hindus of the discrimination they practice against their brethren. Gandhi had been opposed to untouchability from when he comes back in 1915. If you look at his first speeches in southern India, he chastises the Tamils who actually practice untouchability probably worse than anyone else. In the 1920s, he's involved with the Satyagraha in Vaikom in Kerala to have Dalits enter the temple. So he's thought about all this. But Ambedkar's challenge makes him think that I have not done enough. So when the British release him in 1933, he starts an All India tour against Ambedkar. He says, I'm going to spend the next year only campaigning for the abolition of caste distinctions. And again, to reconstruct this tour, the best source are the British intelligence reports. Because the British don't believe him. They don't think that Gandhi, because they don't understand the complexities of the caste system, they don't realize that Gandhi is as interested in social reform as in politics. So everywhere he goes, they follow him, thinking somewhere along this march, he will start another Salt March. It's not about Harijans, it's about, about imperialism. So they follow him, and through the intelligence reports, you get an incredible insight into Gandhi, including into his fundraising methods. So the tour starts in Wardha, where he then is. Then he comes to Nagpur. Then he goes south because it is October and he wants to finish sensibly. He wants to finish the south of India before it becomes in the winter before going back to the north. And then he goes through Tamil Nadu, Kerala, back through Karnataka, and then Bihar, and finally ends in Varanasi, the holy city of the Hindus. So it's a 9-month tour. Everywhere he's followed by these intelligence guys. And who are, because they're convinced that Gandhi, there's an ulterior motive to this march. He's trying to dal mein kala hai, he's trying to stoke another popular rebellion against the British. And from these reports, you get a sense, as I said, of his fundraising methods. He is not interested in dismantling the British Raj in 1933-34. He is interested in creating equality within Hindu society. And for this, he wants to raise money for schools and hospitals and social welfare for Dalits, whom he then calls Harijans, a term we have sensibly rejected now. I think it was a patronizing term and Gandhi was wrong to use it, but that's a separate question. Anyway, so he's raising money. How does he do it? So he gives a talk. Say, let's assume that this is a village audience, and Gandhi's trying to raise money. He says, he starts with a kind of a moral sermon. Says, how can we be fit for freedom from the British if we treat a section of our own society as slaves? Don't you agree we are not fit? And they say, yes, 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 and temporarily shamed by the Mahatma. Then he says, we need to have schools to give Harijan children the same education that you upper caste Hindus have. They say, okay. Then he says, I want to raise money for these schools. I have started a Harijan Sevak Sangh. I have photographs, signed photographs of myself. How much will you give for this? So then they go around, 5 rupees, and money is collected. So he collects some money. Then he realizes that there are some people in the audience. He knows, he's come prepared. He knows there are people in the audience who admire Nehru because Nehru is youthful and all that. He says, okay, I also have 20 photographs, signed photographs of Jawaharlal Nehru. How much will you pay for this? Then that's the second round. The third round, he says, okay, there may be Muslims in the audience. Then he says, and here are some signed photographs of Maulana Azad. Iske liye kitna paisa doge? So his copper is carrying on. Then he says, okay, so he's collected money. Then he says, which of these women will give your jewelry voluntarily? Some more money is paid. Then, and it's very innovative. At one place there is the account where he auctions his shaving stick, which he shaved that morning, and gets 60 rupees for it. Right now, so. Of course, it shows what a smart political operator he was. I also have a long account of a fundraiser in Bombay in 1920 during the non-cooperation movement, where he raises money from the merchants of Bombay. But the point I wanted to make was that I deal with all Gandhi's political campaigns in rich detail, while recognizing that his social campaigns for Hindu-Muslim harmony and for the abolition of untouchability were for him as important as the campaigns to get the British to quit India. So I deal with Gandhi's campaigns. Then there is a great deal on Gandhi's critics. That is, his two great critics, Ambedkar and Jinnah, who were his two most considerable Indian critics, both people of colossal intellect, phenomenal intellect, really powerful thinkers, successful lawyers, which Gandhi had never been himself. Jinnah, who argued that the Congress was a Hindu party, and Ambedkar, who argued that the Congress represented not Hindus but only upper caste Hindus. And they were his two great antagonists, and Jinnah was arguing with him from the 1920s, Ambedkar for almost as long. And I have represented their arguments as they evolved over a period of time. And I have done it without necessarily taking sides. Maybe with Jinnah versus Gandhi, I am more on the side of Gandhi. But Jinnah as Ambedkar, it is impossible to take sides. They were two great figures whom destiny placed as adversaries and had to place as adversaries. Gandhi was an upper caste reformer, guilt-ridden upper caste reformer, who did more than any upper caste Hindu before him to challenge the practice of untouchability, whereas Ambedkar was a reformer from below, an emancipator of his own people, a person with great sense of self-respect and dignity. And history placed them as adversaries, and together they undermined the legitimacy, they undermined the social basis of the caste system and moved India towards a more egalitarian social order. But I deal not just with Ambedkar and Jinnah, but also with Gandhi's critics on the left. For example, Bhagat Singh, people like Bhagat Singh and Subhash Bose, who felt that armed struggle and not non-violence was the way to get the British out of India. I also have a lot on the different viceroys Gandhi dealt with. Gandhi dealt with 7 viceroys in all. And it's very interesting to see the kind of the perception that different viceroys had of him. You know, if you just look at the epigraph to that book you opened,
Pankaj sir,
uh,
epigraph.
epigraph, it was bilkul right at the beginning. Oh, can someone just hand me a copy of the book? This is quite funny though. Let me read it. I'll give it back to you. Don't worry. So I'll just read this out to you. So okay, yeah. So Gandhi dealt with 7 viceroys in all, starting with Harding, who was here when he comes in 1915, and ending with Mountbatten. And I've gone through the kind of private correspondence of each of these viceroys, because some were indifferent to him, some were exasperated by him, some were admiring of him, Mountbatten at the end, and also Irving to some extent. Now here is Lord Willingdon, who was the one who had the most venomous hatred for Gandhi. This is Lord Willingdon writing about Gandhi in 1933. I quote, "It's a beautiful world if it wasn't for Gandhi." He's writing to his sister. Willingdon is writing to his sister from Shimla, from the Viceroyal Lodge in Shimla. He's writing, "It's a beautiful world if it wasn't for Gandhi, who is really a perfect nuisance. At the bottom of every move he makes, which he always says is inspired by God, one discovers the political maneuver. I see the American press is saying what a wonderful man he is. I see the American press is saying what a wonderful man Gandhi is. But the fact is that we live in the midst of very unpractical, mystical and superstitious folk in India who look upon Gandhi as something holy, whereas I look upon him as the biggest humbug alive." Okay, so his relations with his viceroys are also very interesting. So I deal with Gandhi